Yeah, it sells really well because there are lots of people who hate, creationist views and they hate Darwin, and boy, this is really interesting because there's mystery here. It's it doesn't fit into the normal categories, so it's attractive.
So it sounds sort of like, say, um, to use a recent movie, say I really like what L. Frank Baum wrote way back, 100 years ago, and I like the character
Hmm.
Dorothy, I like Ozma, I like Tin Woodsman, and the Land of Oz, but then
Hmm.
I'm going to effectively write fan fiction, and I'm going to
Yeah.
take the names and take, not even the concepts, but just take some of the names and then do whatever I want with them. Is that sort of what you're saying? It seems like Sitchin
Yes.
did. Okay.
Yeah. And you take enough of what's there, in your case, in the original version, so that when people encounter it, who are familiar with that stuff a little bit, there's enough there that it looks like it's attached. It looks like it belongs. It looks like, well, this might be a possible rereading of that. But you know what I mean. There's enough similarity that you can sort of get people to think that thought. And if you're newbies, it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're entertained by the current version. But yeah, I think that's a pretty decent analogy, for what he's doing. I think he really believed it. I think he came to actually believe this stuff, that he'd stumbled across something and could not, either could see, here's the ambiguity for me, he could not or did not. I'm not going to accuse him of dishonesty. I'm willing to think that he was just a little bit off kilter as opposed to just openly dishonest.
Mm-hmm.
But this narrative that he started telling became to him personally compelling and worked in his mind better than other alternatives. And I think he actually came to believe it. It's really odd because there are some books of his that he has places where he's Jewish by background, and people say, "What do you mean Sitchin couldn't read Hebrew and he messes up Hebrew grammar?" Well, he does. Okay, my 12-year-old, my 14-year-old, they can read English, but if you ask them to diagram sentences, they're going to get stuff wrong. If you ask them to do grammatical analysis, it doesn't matter that they're sight readers.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do the analysis? Can you do hermeneutics? Can you do interpretation? Can you do all this stuff?
Well,
I'm
Jewish.
I don't think he could do any of it either. Yeah, but I mean, you look at it, and he has this tradition. He has, again, a Jewish background, and there are places in his books where he senses that what he's saying is really treading on Jewish monotheistic sensibilities, and he tries to sort of accommodate that and kind of come up with an alternate way of understanding that. And so you can tell he's thinking about what he's doing, and he has an agenda. And what I mean by that is he's not trying to just relate the facts. He's trying to create a world and a world view in what he's doing. And I think he just sort of got taken by the whole enterprise. And when people loved it and really soaked it up, he started selling lots of books. I think he became convinced that he was just really onto something, and that was that.
I'm sure that some people, as far as I know, not actual archaeologists or language scholars, but I'm sure there are some people out there who would say that Sitchin was actually right in his reading and interpretation, and that the modern scholars are wrong. And you said that these codexes or codices, I'm not sure what the plural is, but these have been built up over the last century or so. But to play devil's advocate, I'm sure that there's some places where they're incorrect. I'm curious as to what you would say to those people, and how, if you can describe it in the short version of how do you actually figure out what a certain symbol means? Because I think you and I, just in the last few days, although it'll probably be 2 months ago when listeners finally get this, we've been getting this email from this guy who is trying to point out that this symbol actually could mean several different things, or this symbol means one thing, and then you're saying, well, no, it means this. I'm curious as to what that process is, and effectively how do we know what we know for these translations?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say a couple of things. I would say that the way you articulated that, and I'm not saying you did this, I'm making a generalization here, incorrectly frames my argument.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is you can't misinterpret the content of words that doesn't even exist. In other words, if there was a line in a single tablet that had the Anunnaki on Nibiru and called Nibiru a planet, we could argue about how to translate that. What I'm saying is that information doesn't exist in a line. It just isn't there. So I can't mistranslate vapor. So in one sense, it's not about translation. It's not about ambiguities of the content. Now that's different, though, than this symbolic stuff. I look at something like this cylinder seal that Sitchin and his fan base use to, talk about. Well, here's this cylinder seal, and it has this object that looks like a shining sun. They would call it a sun. It has these dots around it, and if you count them and include that one, there's 12, and there must be 12 planets and all that sort of thing. Well, what I want to see is, well, first of all, I think that is a misanalysis of the symbol, and the way you get there is you find texts where a text will correspond to a symbolic object, a picture, a pictorial representation, where the people themselves who produced that thing are commenting on that picture. And if you get enough of them, and there are plenty of them, you can start to develop a typology of what that pictorial representation was used to describe. What thought was it used to convey? What does it mean to the person who created it? You build a typology of these things. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing you would check is, does this seal, which has text but which says nothing about the object itself, does this seal and what it says give us any information whereby we can take this seal and align it to the typology? Well, it doesn't, so that's sort of a dead end. Then the next question I want to know is, okay, let's assume that this seal describes 12 planets. We don't have anything that actually says that, but let's just assume it for the time being. Let's go to cuneiform astronomical texts by both the Sumerians and the people who inherited their work, the Akkadians and the Babylonians. In the voluminous literature that we have about their astronomy, do they ever mention 12 planets? No. Do they ever mention Nibiru as a planet beyond Saturn? No. I mean, you start to take the known that you have, and you use that to try to answer this unknown over here. Okay, that's using primary source material, asking questions about it, and trying to get the answers from, drum roll please, from the primary source material. You're comparing, known to the unknown, but you're operating within, pardon the pun, within the same orbit here. Mm-hmm. You're trying to, as best you can, figure out what the people who produce this stuff, how they would have thought about it. What claims, what assertions would they have made about this thing that they created? I don't really care what someone living 2 millennia after them thinks that they meant. I would rather go with what they meant. And so this is what I'm telling people to do when it comes to vocabulary. Well, Mike, you have this text. Maybe it's just translated wrong. Maybe Sitchin translated it correctly. Well, can we find Sitchin's word meanings in any of the bilingual dictionaries? No. In other words, you keep hitting this no answer when you do these things with what Sitchin is saying. And I've had to tell people, look, here's where we're at. I'm going to assume that the Sumerians are correct about what they wrote. When they tell me, because the Sumerians and the Akkadians created these dictionaries, I'm going to go with them. My money's on them, as opposed to this guy who lived 2,000 years later or longer. Okay, that seems like a reasonable bet, that they would be better able to define their words than this guy can. And to me, that seems really simple. But to a lot of people, it doesn't seem simple at all. They don't want to hear that because the idea has caught hold. And it has sparked a fascination within them, and that's just where they're at.
Okay, so it seems like there are two answers to my question. First, that I didn't ask it right. That it really, with Sitchin's stuff, it's more that he makes these links when they simply don't exist. Like, he'll say, Anunnaki lived on Nibiru, and that's in the text, when you're saying Anunnaki is written in one book way over here that has nothing to do with Nibiru, which is written in something else, which is way over, like, they're completely separate. And then the other question was, okay, so then how do they how do you how do you figure out what symbol means what? And that's from the text, because but this is something I didn't know, I
want to know.
So I'm just trying to make sure I understand it. So you have, and this is something I didn't know, is that you have both symbols and you have writings, and that in some of the writings it says this, maybe not verbatim, but this symbol means this, and that's what you use as a starting point for understanding what they meant.
Right. What you're trying to do is you're trying to use all of the things that the culture produced, all of the creative intellectual enterprise of a culture that we have, whether it's text or statuary, whatever. Mm-hmm. You're trying to use all of that material to answer a question about what they would have thought about something, as opposed to going outside that culture. Now, there is a place for doing that because there are civilizations that live close to them, so there are cross-cultural connections. And you might find a Babylonian writer who said, hey, the Sumerians thought this, about that. And so you might find, that's another layer away of the information. But where I start with is, look, we have this culture, we have its intellectual repository in front of us. I'm sitting here, and on my desk is this cylinder seal. and there's a guy that says, hey, this cylinder seal informs us that the Sumerians knew that there were 12 planets. So if I can translate anything on there, well, does the translation validate that view? Well, no, it doesn't. So now what do I do? Well, is there anything else that the Sumerians said anywhere that would at least validate the idea that there are 12 planets? If I can find that in their intellectual repository, then this interpretation of the seal might be true. But if I can't find any of that, and there's just a lot of astronomical material that's all published. Mm-hmm. It makes me wish I were an astronomer so I could understand it better. But what I can read and understand is that they don't have a planetary system in their astronomy that goes beyond Saturn. So it rules out the 12 right away. So then the question arises in my mind, well, how could I possibly claim that this seal conveys an idea that is not only not validated elsewhere within, again, we're still operating within the realm of the Sumerian thought. It's not validated anywhere else by their material, but it's actually contradicted.